what a king. Then the king sent and gathered to him all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. Now, elders, usually in the Old Testament, are tribal leaders, but they came to be identified with older people of wisdom and renown in a local area like Jerusalem. And the king went up to the house of the Lord, and all the men of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem with him, and the priests and the prophets and all the people. Now, priests and prophets are two sources of inspiration or revelation, really. There are three in the Old Testament. There is the priest of the law, which we get from Moses, Leviticus, the Pentateuch, the Torah. Then there is the prophets, and you're familiar with that, to the Hebrews, Kings and Chronicles are prophets, the writers. And then we have all the prophets you're familiar with, the major and minor prophets. But there's one more group that's not mentioned here, and that's the sages. And that's the wisdom literature, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, Song of Songs. And so here's two of the groups. Now, I want you to notice that one of these prophets is a lady. I think some of you have an ingrained bias against that. I want you to look right back up in chapter 22, verses 8 through 13, and there is the prophetess Huldah. And boy, she's a good girl, I want to tell you. Now, notice here where it says, both small and great. And he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which most assume is some part of Deuteronomy. Now, this is not something new. Several times in the Old Testament, the law is written orally. Let me give you a few. Exodus 20, verses 1 and following. Deuteronomy 5, 4 and following. Nehemiah 8, 1. And so there's many occasions where that was read. Now, notice where it says, which was found in the house of the Lord. Now, you got to go back to chapter 22 to see all this. We don't know exactly what's happening. It's obvious that the reform was already going to some extent before the law was found because the temple was being remodeled. Isn't it amazing that they had lost part of the law of Moses, knowing how much the Jews loved that? Well, what amazes me more is that they had lost it, didn't know they had lost it. They had become so idolatrous for so many years that they had lost that true zeal and love and even the revelation of Yahweh, their ancient tribal God. Now, notice in verse 3, and the king stood by the pillar. Now, we have several references of him standing by the pillar. I think back in chapter 16, 18 is referring to a special platform, a conspicuous place where the king stood, where all the people could see that the king was participating in worship as they were. A prominent place. You ought to see chapter 2 Kings 11:14, 2 Chronicles 23:13, Nehemiah 8:4. Okay. And so he made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord, to keep His commandments, His testimonies, His statutes with all his heart and all his soul. What he's saying, I'm making a priority commitment to you, O God, to do what you've told us to do. And because he made the commitment, look at the last of verse 3, and all the people entered into the covenant. As Manasseh had seduced them down the road of idolatry, Josiah led them down the road of covenant, fidelity, and loyalty. Friends, leaders are important people. They really have an influence. Now, look at verse 4. Here we begin the purge of these foreign deities and foreign practices. And I'm sure the Assyrian gods were the first to go. Assyria was losing her power. She couldn't enforce this anymore. They so hated her. It's a cruel nation that when she couldn't reinforce her claim on Judah, man, they started kicking out her gods. Now, they're going to kick out all the gods eventually. They're going to start with the gods of Assyria. Now, and the king commanded Hilkiah, the high priest, and the priest of the second order. Now that means those who served the sanctuary. They didn't offer the sacrifice. They were keepers of the door and keepers of this and that. And the doorkeepers to bring out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels that were made for Baal and Ashtaroth. Now I want to show you that same graphic I showed you last week about all of these different deities. Now let's see it if we could. And I want you to notice I've changed one. I've changed divination, well, witchcraft to teraphim, which we're going to hit. I've left divination in, even though the word doesn't appear in this chapter. All those same idolatries are going to occur. As those were present in the reign of Manasseh, so they are objects of the purge in Josiah. I've added several down at the bottom, and we'll get to those in the middle of this chapter. Those are gods of the nations around Judah, and we'll talk about those, but that's the list. And if you don't have time to do that and you want it, just put your video recorder on pause, and I think you can read those. Now, Notice it says Baal and Ashtaroth, Canaanite fertility gods, men and women, all the host of heaven, the Babylonian astral deities, and he burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron and carried their ashes to Bethel. Now, of course, to burn these idols is what Deuteronomy 7:25 says to do with them. And why would he carry the ashes to Bethel? Well, Bethel is the site of the calf worship of the northern 10 tribes. It was already unclean and polluted, so Josiah said, we'll just dump more pollution there. And so he just dumped the ashes of all these idols at the place of Jeroboam the first, golden calf. Now, and he did away with the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had appointed to burn incense in the high places. Now, from verse 20, I think he slit their throat, all of them. Here it doesn't seem like that, but verse 20 says he slaughtered them. Notice it says, mention of Baal again, to the sun, the moon, the constellations, and all the host of heaven. Now this Babylonian ancient astrology, which is so prominent in our own day in all these horoscopes junk, was the worship of the sun, the moon, the 5 major planets, and the zodiac. And so here again we have man trying to control his own destiny, run his own ship, and getting away from God, and that's his sample right here. Now, verse 6, and he brought out the Ashtaroth from the house of the Lord outside Jerusalem, the brook Kidron, burned at the brook, ground it in dust, and threw its dust on the graves of the common people. Well, what does that mean? Well, Ashtaroth is supposed to be a carved wood symbol of the female fertility god of the Canaanite pantheon. And he just didn't want to burn it. He wanted to do something with the ashes. Now, when it says he threw them on the graves of the common people, one or two things are here. Either the common people had so participated in the idolatrous practices of the Judean kings that this was a symbol of saying, you love them, you can live with them. Or Jews really don't like graveyards. They're considered unclean. And maybe it's kind of like throwing the ashes on Bethel. It was already unclean, so it wouldn't pollute anything, so he may have just put them in the graveyard. Now, look at verse 7. He broke down the house of the male cult prostitutes. Now, what is that? Well, the word here, literally in Hebrew, is the word sacred or holy. But it's a male form of this, and so it came to mean either sodomites, homosexuals, or male prostitutes in the sense of the fertility cult. And we're not real sure which. But notice it said, which were in the house of the Lord. Male prostitutes in the house of the Lord? Does that seem so incongruent? And notice again it says, where the women were weaving hangings to Ashtaroth. Now probably these were the cultic virgins, and apparently they were making for themselves sensuous garments to dress in and practice their fertility rites. Apparently that's what that is. Then he brought all the priests from the cities of Judah and defiled the high places by throwing dead bones on them and that kind of thing, burning them. And he were burned incense from Geba to Beersheba, and he broke down the high places of the gates. Apparently even in Jerusalem, these high places, these altars to foreign deities were even in the gates of Jerusalem. Now, back in the book of Judges, these high places were to worship Yahweh. But as the nation got away from God, they came to be Canaanite or Phoenician or Babylonian or Assyrian. So all the gods were worshipped here. And that's why God wanted to pull everything into one central sanctuary committed to Him.